Hey, good morning, everybody. Uh, Good to see some of you, Andy. I'm very sorry that your camera isn't working, so I don't get to see your face, but appreciate the virtual wave. Um, I'm going to be leading the call today, and we're going to take a look at, surprise, surprise, an IBJ article. And I'd love to get some verbal feedback going on this call. I think we have a good number here where if you're comfortable to unmute yourself and chime in on one of my questions, that would be great. So what we're going to do this, IBJ, I'm going to share my screen here in a moment. Rosie, I think you'll need to give me permission to do that. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to go through this article almost line by line because it's not a long article. It's the one that Rosie sent text of earlier. And it's very much just kind of data point after data point. And what I'd love to do is talk about what do those data points mean? What's happening in the market, and what does that mean for us as realtors? We are still in a bit of a twilight zone of perceived conditions versus real conditions. And I think as much as real estate professionals like yourselves intuitively know the real conditions, the public really, in my opinion, the public really doesn't. I think the general consensus that I am getting is that the public is still surprised by what's happening. And so I think this continues to be a real value add opportunity for realtors. You're always looked at as the expert. Hopefully most of the time we are. But I think in a case like this, where kind of conventional understanding and reality are so far apart from each other, you can see that the value of being the expert has actually gone up for the moment. So I'm going to share my screen. Hang on. There we go. Y'all can see that. Sweet. So I've kind of busted on the IBJ a little bit and some of the terminology that they use. You know, I guess if you're a journalist, you learn that if your title of your article doesn't make it sound like there was something really bad or really good happening, no one clicks on it. So I'm not trying to pick on them. That's just the reality. That's their job. But for 2 months in a row, in April and May, the articles that would have been written in May and June about April and May, their summary in the headline was the kind of disaster. And then within the article, almost as like this subtext was, oh, by the way, we set another record for high prices. So unit count, so just summarizing, for 2 months in a row, it had been unit count way down, prices up, record prices. And so I think most of our community will immediately digest the kind of disaster word, whatever word was used, to assume, oh, real estate market's bad. Got it. Okay. When in reality, unit count and price are two very different things. And for us as realtors, unit count means a lot, but for the consumer, price is really what means more. So that's kind of backstory. So I'm gonna scroll here. So it starts out by saying the sales have made a big rebound in June. So what they mean is that May of 20 in comparison to May of 19, transaction count was way down. Same thing happened again in April. In June, Central Indiana sales unit count wise were pretty close to identical in 2020 to what they were in 2019. Okay, so completed sales here in this paragraph, completed sales in the 16 county area decreased 3% in June on a year-over-year basis, but were 28% over the previous month. So very clearly what happened is our unit count in April and May dropped a ton because of COVID. And we're back to a quote unquote normal pace in the region for the month of June. I'm going to come back to this, but something really interesting is happening right now in July. Okay. So 3,500 transactions in June, compared with how far they were down in May, 2,745 in May, which is very low for May and very close to identical to June of 19. Okay. On a year-to-date basis, area sales are down essentially 5%. So the first half of 2019, we saw 16,590 transactions. Through the first half of 2020, we saw 15,784 transactions. If somebody's willing to unmute themselves, in light of what we saw happen in April and May, and what you could probably guess what I'm going to talk about with July and August, what strikes you about that? The first half of 2020 down 5% in unit count from the first half of 2019. Somebody unmute themselves, and how does that number strike you?
Okay, I'm recognizing that I'm not a practicing agent, but I just feel like it's funny that they aren't addressing inventory at all.
They do later in the article, but yes.
Oh, okay. Just what I've heard from agents is that inventory is really down. So I'm wondering if that is contributing to the sales being down.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. What other thought?
Mark, my thought is that's all. 5% with COVID and everything. You know.
Yeah, that's a great 2-word reaction. Like, that's all. Totally agree. Yeah, and I think you guys both hit on something really important there. I would look at this and say there's these 2 big factors to consider. One is what happened with COVID, that in April and May, we got hammered in unit count in April and May because of COVID. And then later in the article, it talks about inventory going way down. And in the middle of both of those things happening through half of the year, for our market to only be off 5% in unit count, guys, it's actually amazing, because we are on track now in 2020 to outpace 2019 in transaction count as an industry. As a brokerage, we're going to crush last year's transaction count. I mean, in central Indiana, because of now what's happening in July and August, I think what you're going to see is transaction count in July and August year over year from 20 to 19 is notably higher. So we're playing catch up. So a lot of those transactions from April and May I think are just getting pushed into July and August. And so what my prediction here halfway through the year is that in the middle of a large pandemic and a major inventory problem, our market will still see more transactions in 2020 than it did in 2019. So sit with that for a second. For any of the statistics nerds, inventory. Oh shoot. I'm getting a notice that my internet is unstable. Can you guys hear me okay?
You froze a little bit, but you're back now. Can you repeat what you were saying about statistic nerds?
Yeah. I think for a statistic nerd, you would realize that in the middle of a pandemic with a major inventory problem, with those 2 things going on, the fact that I'm predicting that in 2020, our market will have more transactions than it did in 2019, that is a huge deal. It indicates something very, very strong about the central Indiana real estate market. So diving in a little bit here, this active inventory in June sank 43% on a year-over-year basis. So what that means is last year in June, there were a significantly higher number of homes for sale than this year in June. Yet, we did the same number of transactions this year, essentially. So there were way fewer houses for sale. There was a pandemic, yet the same number of houses traded hands. So that just doesn't, it's not what you would predict unless something significant was happening in central Indiana housing. So this is pending sales in June. We're up 18% from a year ago, a positive sign for July sales. So I'm referring to earlier, I think July unit count is going to be very high relative to what July normally is. August appears to be the same. And where's this one data point? I want to show, let's see, I've lost track. Yeah, so all this adds up to median prices have hit all-time highs in 4 straight months. Let's be clear, the IBJ does not run its headlines by me, regretfully. I wish that they did. If they sent all of this data to me and said, what do you think should be the headline of this article? It's that sentence that I have highlighted right now. Median prices have hit all-time highs in 4 straight months. That's all time. So that's not saying year over year prices were a little higher in June of 2020 than they were of 2019. What that means is that 4 straight months, and I think July is going to be number 5, there's clearly a price increase happening in our market. And so again, conventional wisdom, and maybe the IBJ is feeding this, real estate market is down. No, it is not. It's simply not. In the middle of a pandemic with a really low inventory, our transaction count is now on pace to beat last year's transaction count, which means, guys, the data just keeps piling up. We're about to have, as a city, a significant price jump. And I'm obviously, we'll never know, but I think it'd be a fascinating case study if you could try to evaluate what would have happened in central Indiana in 2020 had we not had COVID, because we already had the inventory problem. Obviously, COVID has kind of compounded that. So we'll never know, but I think what's going to happen, you're looking 5 or 10 years down the road. I think we might see this as the start of a sustained increase in price in central Indiana. And I just don't think a lot of people know that's what's happening. And I'm not trying to assign good or bad to price increase. I'm just stating what I think is happening. And it's right here in this article. And you all see the data, but I think it's just a good value add opportunity as realtors. This is why we're seeing at an anecdotal level, this is why we're seeing I think I shared a couple weeks ago about, a realtor talking about getting 22 offers on a house. This is why. It's not that every house is getting multiple offers, but certainly something near the median that's a 3-bed, 2-bath that's move-in ready. It's like the surest bet right now, is that it gets multiple offers. This is why. So this is on my peer collective call Monday. Several of our agents were talking on that call about how painful it is to work with buyers right now. So again, I think there's this mentality that what's happening in our marketplace right now is very comparable to 2010. And all of this data and the anecdotal experience from our agents is saying, no, it's the exact opposite of what was happening in 2010. Is the mirror image, the exact reverse of what was happening, where in 2010, maybe it was kind of miserable to be a seller and it was pretty advantageous to be a buyer. It's the exact opposite now. I'm beating the horse dead, but I think as more and more data comes out, it just keeps affirming that this same thing is happening. And what I think could happen is that by the end of 2020, we're going to say, holy cow, we have a major inventory problem because we don't have nearly enough houses for sale. Our unit count for the year went up and prices are starting to go up really fast. That's where I think we're going to be at the end of the year. I would, let me share one more thing in terms of brokerage, and then I want to open it up for questions. So I'm stopping the screen share. The brokerage itself, just to give you a reference point for Platt, April and May, our unit count was up, though our unit count was primarily up in those months because we've grown as a company. We have more agents, we have larger teams. So I think that was kind of as anticipated. April and May was up. June was up a bit as well. What's really fascinating is where we're headed for July and August. We will very possibly double our transaction count for that 60-day period of time from 2019 to 2020. So 2019 closed sales in July and August, roughly 200 for that 60-day period. We probably won't double, but we will be very close. And it's possible that we will double in transaction count from 19 to 20 in a 60-day period that includes August, which is typically a bit of a slower month. August, I think you're the ones experiencing this, so you probably know it. August does not project to be a slow month at this point in time. I think it's going to be really interesting to see what September to December is like, because I think in terms of activity levels, unit count in even September and October, which is generally fairly low, could crush the norm. That's what it looks like to me. It's going to happen. I'm going to answer Andy's question here. Andy asked, when you say significant price jump, what time frame are you speaking of? 5 years or shorter? I mean shorter. What I mean there is that, say in 5 years or 10 years, when you can pivot and turn around and look back, because it's always hard to know exactly what's happening in the moment. I think what we'll look to is 2020, 2021 as a very notable increase in Central Indiana price. I don't think it'll take 5 years. I think it's just something where sometimes to really get your arms around what happened and when did it happen, you need a couple years of hindsight to look at that. I think we're looking at perhaps an overdue pressure on price in Central Indiana housing. Again, I'm not celebrating. I'm just saying, like, that's what looks like is happening right now. This is totally anecdotal, but I had a conversation with a friend who's he works for a industrial commercial real estate developer, but he does track migration patterns around the country, where our population increasing and decreasing. And I think this is fascinating. His company believes that moderately priced Midwest cities could see an influx as a result of COVID. So, for example, Salesforce has a lot of employees that live in San Francisco who now for months haven't been congregating in a specific location. Their second largest group of employees is in Indianapolis. If you're Salesforce and you're looking at that saying, wait a minute, we probably have to pay something like 175% of average salary to employ someone in San Francisco to what we do in Indianapolis. Why are we doing that? That the fluidity of a lot of industries has now been proven. So I think there could be even an additional move to markets like Indianapolis. And we wouldn't certainly see all of that. There's plenty of cities that you would say would be like Indianapolis, but we certainly have an argument to be kind of on that list. Yeah, I agree. Love visiting. Be tough to justify living in the Bay Area right now for me. Joel asked, can I elaborate on the comps being reset and the factors that play into that in our current market? Joel's had multiple properties fully appraised to the surprise of all parties, though the purchase price was closer to 15 or 20 over list and there were no comps to support the jump. Yeah, this is this certainly started happening in, I'd say probably 2016. We went through like a 5-year period of stabilization, and then it was maybe in 15 or 16 when prices started jumping. And I remember there was about a 6-month period of time where my own personal transactions and my team transactions, there was a 6-month period where I had to appeal half of the appraisals. Every other appraisal was coming in under purchase price because prices were jumping. Appraisers are always going to be the last ones to catch up. Joel, I'm actually surprised that you haven't had issues. I think this is going to be a key issue for our industry over the next 2 years. Appraisers are going to struggle to keep up because they have to use comps. They really, their hands are tied a bit. They can't just use there's low inventory and the buyer's willing to pay that because they can't find anything else. The bank will force the appraiser to find comparable data. So if you're looking backwards, you're in a price increase market, you're never going to be able to pull quite enough data. So they have to get creative. They have to get kind of artistic about how they will do it. But it does happen. I think, thinking about buyers that have a lot of down payment, buyers that are willing to accept low appraisals, just cash has a way, not necessarily a cash buyer, but a buyer with some significant amount of cash has a way of allowing the market to just slowly catch up. So you put a couple of those transactions in, and now appraisers have the data that they need going forward. But I think we're going to be in that cycle for a while. So if I were a listing agent, right now, I would be perfecting the art of a appraisal packet. And I think for the next couple of years, this is just going to be a big part of your job, is to present information via email and in the house to the appraiser before they do the appraisal. And maybe even to address, here's the comparables that we used. And I know there might be a bit of an atypical philosophy to why we chose these comparables, and here's why. Emphasize the number of offers you got, using a lot of language surrounding, we intentionally priced the property below what we believed it was going to sell for. Like, we weren't surprised that it sold for $20,000 over list. That's what we thought was going to happen. Yeah, Ryan, I think we're also going to see a lot of that. The fact that in a span of 45 days, Ryan had 2 different appraisers call the same house $45,000 apart from each other. No change to the house. Like, don't tell me that an appraisal is an objective, like, all-encompassing opinion of value. It's clearly not. It's just as subjective as anything else. Joel, Pike, Lawrence is another one. Markets where you wouldn't traditionally think there's this rapid price increase, but there's a lot of median priced housing inventory in Pike and Lawrence. Southport, Greenwood, other parts of town where you wouldn't necessarily think there's this like hot market, but there's a lot of average price houses. So, okay, believe it or not, I'm going to shut up for a minute. I would love to know, so you're a realtor, hearing me talk about the conditions of low inventory, increasing transaction count, record price after record price after record price. What does it mean for you with your clients? How do you use this to add more value to the service that you provide? A lot of you are doing this, by the way. This isn't the first time you've thought about this. I just want to point out real quick that I think what Joel maybe meant to say was in light of Mark's insight on where we are going. I love that he actually typed in lieu of Mark's insight on where we were. So apparently Joel would rather have a training on appraisal packages than mine. So I don't disagree with you, Joel. What are some examples that you guys are doing right now in light of this that you think you're adding value to clients or that you think you could do in the future? I'm going to call on somebody if nobody speaks up.
Mark, can you hear me? Anybody?
Yep,
No.
You're good.
This is probably just a matter of how are we talking to our clients? How are we starting and ending the conversation with sellers especially? And how are we gauging their motivation and telling them what we believe to happen in this market based on different variances of what you just described? That affordability market, I'm headed to one right now. Seems like some people will shift a lot of interest in scooping up as much of those affordable houses and doing as much as you can with them to turn them over quickly. And then in those retail name brand big markets, how are you helping your clients understand a potential loss from the next 6 to 12 months? So I think for me, it's just been how am I talking to my clients and what are we actually, it's a bit of a different conversation, obviously. So.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. That's good. Thank you.
You're going to have to step that up and make sure you really qualify the buyers on the front end in a way that you maybe weren't before and prepare them for something they have an inkling of or understanding of. And then just begin making sure your service is in line with the market you're working in.
Yeah, I think buyer and seller's intake looks different just with setting expectations. Specifically, like strap on your seatbelt and just prepare for multiple offers and low inventory and be ready to move quick.
Yeah, I love that. The setting of expectations. That's good.
I feel like I have had to do both with sellers and tell them things like it's not every property that is getting multiple offers because now buyers are almost expecting it. So I have to say it's the perfectly priced property that everybody wants that's getting fought for, because I've had buyers that or sellers that list kind of pushing the market, and then they're upset that they're not getting multiple offers. And so I'm like, not every property is getting multiple offers. It's the aggressively priced or perfectly priced property. So I've kind of had to back into that, you know, so that
Hmm.
the expectations isn't like, you can't just stick, you know, you can't just say, I want $2 million for my property and people are going to fight for it.
I was going to reference, actually, before the call ended, that particular transaction, Jenny.
Yeah.
Jenny had a seller get a full price offer
Day one.
day one that
Cash.
expressed disappointment that it was the only offer and considered passing.
Yeah, on a full price cash offer day one. I literally said, I'm sorry you're disappointed that we have a full price cash offer on the first day. But she literally, you know, and I had to remind her, I said, this was the number that we knew that if we priced it here 20 grand less, we would probably get multiple offers, but we chose to go 20 over because I told you we could probably do that. So I think there's an important thing to remind people, because I have buyers that think every house is getting multiple offers, and that's not true. And I've also warned people that we have a really big issue right now, in my opinion, of properties going stale. Like, I have tons of buyers that have asked me, well, this house has been on the market for 14 days. What's wrong with it? You know, and so I feel like I tell my sellers, we need to hit this price right on. We can't just go 20 or 30 over, because buyers don't have the margin to mess around, and they're not going to go see overpriced houses, and they're not going to lowball the offer day two. So I think we just have this really sensitive market right now, and you can't just list at whatever you want and expect it to sell.
Yeah, which I think speaks to the why are we seeing so many houses trade way over list price? Why don't people just list a lot higher? There's a limit
Exactly.
to that.
Yes,
Yeah.
there is a limit, and buyers are sensitive. And, you know, I have to remind my sellers that house was priced so that it would get bidding wars. And, you know, and I had a perfect example in Lawrence Township. There was two almost identical houses, and we lost out on one that was priced at 217. And I literally told my buyer, they want a bidding war. That's why they priced it this way. And then the house across the street, they priced it at 230 because of the other one went for 230, and they knew it. And so they priced it at 230 and got two offers. First one fell off, and then we got it, you know. So that's a huge dynamic I think sellers need to understand, and buyers too.
Something that Jenny said there, I think, transitions nicely into a question that Johanna just asked in the chat. She said, are you encouraging your buyers to bring cash to cover the potential gap between appraisal amount and offer amount? I saw in a Indianapolis real estate professionals Facebook conversation a few days ago, someone posted, I don't remember word for word, but something along the lines of, how are you ethically comfortable advising your buyers to overpay for properties? It was like a loaded question. I kind of take issue with a few of the words they used. But I think there's a legit question in there, which is, what's our role with a buyer in a market like this when we know they're probably going to get beat out on a couple of houses? And how do we advise them? So coming back to a principle that is true in any market condition, Johanna, part of the answer to your question, in my opinion, this principle is always true. It is not your job to tell a buyer what to pay for a house. Never. It is your job to provide good information and gauge what the right number is for them, which is their decision, and then to execute the strategy. So what I mean by good information might be, ignore the fact that the house was listed for 217, like Jenny just said. Like, look, we know it's worth 240. You've looked at 100 houses. You've missed out on 3. We know this house is worth 240 right now. 217 is just a list number. So don't get stuck on 217. Make the right decision. What is the house worth for you? And in some of those cases, I think a buyer should consider offering to make up the gap. Do I think that's always a good idea? No, because a house might not be worth it. I also think Joel kind of referenced this. Having good intake conversations on the front end can help by saying to a buyer, there's going to come a point in time in this process where you feel like you're overpaying because you don't have leverage. Like buyers just don't have much leverage right now. So if you don't have much leverage, you feel like you're overpaying, maybe even have a conversation about what do we mean by overpaying? Do we mean you had to compete? I don't know if that's what overpaying really means, but sometimes I think that's what people mean when they say overpay. Do we mean you had to pay over list price? Do we mean you had to pay over appraised value? I think you could make an argument that overpay means you paid more than the house is worth right now. A buyer could choose to do that. It's their prerogative. It's your job to make sure they understand what they're doing. So I've had a client buy a house where I said, hey, look, I think you're probably paying more than market value, but I think you know that. And as long as you're not upset if you call me in 6 months and ask me to sell the house for what you're paying right now, because I'm not sure we could. But if you know that and you're willing to do it to get this house, great. I'll help you execute that strategy. I think that's your job. They're eyes wide open. Yeah, Johanna, I know we were talking about that on Monday. Beaten out 6 times is, I mean, it's just brutal. And it's hard to maintain like rational decision making, right? When you've lost out on 6 houses, I think that might be a part of your value add to her or him, is to help them try to maintain rational decision making when that's going to be really difficult. 5 minutes left. Other input questions. Rosie, what you and Jess were messaging about was doing a training on appraisal appeal and packets.
Yeah, I think, so we have another training session coming up the first 2 weeks of August. So I think I'm gonna look at the schedule and see if we can rearrange to make one of those over appraisal packets.
Yeah. And I would, this example comes to mind, Natalie and Allie, and I have had some email exchange recently about a particular listing that our brokerage has pending right now that is let's say it's a very unique appraisal situation. I would say, if nothing else, get feedback from your peers. Talk to Jess, talk to me, talk to your teammates, talk to other co-agents. In a situation where you kind of had that sense from either side of the transaction, I don't know how appraisal is going to work on this one. If you don't do anything else, get feedback from other people. I do that. All of our most experienced agents do that. Be encouraged. I like Jenny's term of sensitive market. I think sensitive markets demonstrate the value that realtors provide. I really do. I think a market like this provides opportunity for a realtor to prove to the consumer that we don't just push paper. That we have a real value add. I think we always have a value add. Well, I better believe that, but in a market like this, it's compounded, which is really good news for our profession. So, good stuff. thanks for joining, everybody. I know it's not always the most fun topic to look at percentages and year-over-year data and all that, but I think it is at least a small part of our job to be in the loop on those things and to just spend a minute thinking about how does it impact our work. So thanks for being willing to do that. Look forward to a call in a couple weeks and hopefully a training focused on appraisals in the near future. Thanks, everybody.